Ladies and gentlemen, let's get ready for the Wot Supp podcast. With your host, Stu OG Industry Shannon and Will Warren Davey, new school formulator extraordinaire. We're talking all things supplements with insiders, athletes, experts, and more. So sit back, relax, and prepare to find out what's up.
Okay, guys, welcome back to the Wot Supp podcast. Today we have, for the part 2 installment, none other than Lucas himself from Ergogenic Health down in Melbourne, a regular to the show now. This is his second episode. Welcome back, Lucas. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Will. Glad to be here.
And of course, our faithful co-host, none other than Stu Shannon. Good morning, Stu.
G'day, guys. How are you all? Nice to do a podcast at a reasonable hour for this one, Will. I know a few of us have been up at 3 a.m. and stuff like that, but it's really nice to have someone who is both an expert in his field, extremely knowledgeable, and really good to have on the podcast, who also happens to be in Australia and in our same time zone. So, yeah, thanks for not getting me up too early there, Lucas.
Yeah, geez, I'm familiar with that because I'm booking guests from the States all the time. It's just a pain, just like waking up super early and stuff for these podcasts, but oh well, we're here today.
Yeah, mate, it's worked out beautifully. And I think it's really good timing because off air we were just chatting and you've just completed your naturopathic degree recently, mate, and which is really obviously been a massive focus on botanicals. And I guess we're really fortunate in that, like on the last installment, we are able to really deep dive today on all things, botanicals, nootropics, really go back to the grassroots of supplements and really geek out there. So I guess, mate, what's been on just to give the listeners a bit of a background on yourself, mate, who maybe not, of course, caught the first episode, give us a brief rundown of Ergogenic Health and what you're trying to accomplish down south.
Yeah, I guess so my brand Ergogenic Health really started out as just like a pure interest in like how can we biohack the body, what sort of supplements can we utilize to change the way that we perform, whether that be in the gym or studying or anything really related to like the ergogenic effects, which really that word ergogenic just means any technique or substance that can be used to enhance physiological or psychological performance. So yeah, really just my mission today is to continue to spread highly valuable research and health information that like millions of people can benefit from.
Phenomenal, mate. Such a good mission statement. I really think and it is so much content that you put out and all free and all, like if anyone isn't following the Ergogenic Health page right now, it is a remarkable resource. You jump on there and there's some, to have that much free content given out is very rare for listeners. So anyone who hasn't gotten around that page yet, please do so. Now, I guess for those of us I've had a few requests since our last episode, and particularly since we've had some people like, in the past, the Gorilla Chemist, we've had a few other people who are really big in the supplement space. I've had a lot of interest around nootropics in the supplement industry. Stu, would you say that lately the nootropics space?
100%. This is something that, on a retail front anyway, 5 years ago, people weren't asking for, and the word nootropic, it sounded like gibberish to them. So it's something that we're more and more getting asked about. People are interested, people are intrigued, but I think that it's kind of still in this misty fog. People don't really get it yet. People who are working around it every day, like myself, Will, obviously Lucas, that's where I think we can shed some light on some of this stuff, get people more excited about it and push further into this field.
Yeah, I've always thought the same, like just like the initial phases of like that word nootropic, it just scares people. Like there's like, they see the words like, oh, what's that? I can't touch that. Like,
well, there's something scary. I think when we're talking about, the control center of our body, the brain, it's responsible for all processes, all biochemical processes, all physiological happenings within the body. People don't like the idea of doing anything to that, whether it be for the better or for the worse. They just don't like messing around with it because they're like, I don't know how this control center works. I don't want to know how it works. So let's just not dabble with it. But I think, when we've got data and we've got, years and years of research and use of these things, and we can show, hey, this is safe, this is effective, and it's profound. That's where I get really excited.
Yeah, when we do the research and we understand like well, now we're starting to realize like all of the downstream effects of these hormonal cascades, like the release of thyroid stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone and gonadotrophin releasing hormone, these are actually modulated by specific like serotonin receptors and dopamine receptors that like we understand now. Like we can use certain pharmacological interventions to actually, bind to, activate, and target these receptors. And we understand now, like we can actually elicit a certain effect, which I find that process like empowering and exciting.
Oh, it's phenomenal, isn't it? It's really cool to see, because I think all of us got into this space because we were trying to help people at the start and and I think we fell in love with the felt effect of supplements as well in a lot of ways. And I know that in our last episode, Lucas, you recounted how many times you'd sit there and guinea pigs different herbs and botanicals on yourselves, and I think that's the real fun of these things. When you've tried, something that boosts dopamine for the first time, or something that's boosting acetylcholine for the first time, or serotonin, it's a very noticeable instant effect. When it can really sort of, completely open your mind to things. So what I thought I'd ask is just to sort of start into these topics. I guess if we could flesh out some of the more common ones for our listeners, because off air we were just chatting. As a nice byproduct, a lot of our listeners now are supplement store owners, people in the fitness industry, a lot of retail staff as well in supplement stores seem to be using this podcast as a really good resource for education as well. So I'd love to, for those guys, maybe if we could look at some common nootropics that are currently used, and if you could just walk through a quick 101 on those and their main pathways of action, and then we'll delve right into the really fun experimental ones I know you've been working on heaps. So some of the common ones in our game, tyrosines, alpha GPCs, just these sort of things. If you could give, as if you're telling someone about these for the first time, just get a brief rundown of how they work and what benefits they have.
Yeah, sure. So let's sort of start with like maybe top 4 or 5. So like we've got the very beginner stack is the classic like caffeine L-theanine stack, which L-theanine found within green tea helps to smoothen out the effects of caffeine, reduce the jitters and anxiety. Theanine, possesses that anxiolytic action, so reduces anxiety, and basically it helps to increase alpha waves in the brain. So it can almost, I call it the nootropic that can mimic meditation in a sense, because it really does induce that sort of same brainwave state as like a 30-minute meditation session.
Wow. It was used by monks traditionally, wasn't it? I believe for that exact reason, to try to help achieve that mental state perfect to be in meditative state. In terms of dosages for that, we typically see, 100 milligrams. I've seen as high as 250 milligrams though, but I tend to find that's probably a little bit too far on the calmative side. What's your favorite dosage when you're stacking this in with a caffeinated supplement?
Well, back in the day, I was very experimental. I worked my way all the way up to 800 milligrams.
Whoa! Wow! Yeah, wow.
I had a few geeky friends and this is pretty rare for me to say this because I'm not usually someone who encourages mega dosing things because like I'm always aware of the side effects. But I knew like L-theanine, pretty benign, not very harmful. Like it's not going to do much. I had some friends. One of my close like business partner that at the time was taking like 1,000 milligrams a day. He's just scooping like
just dry scooping L-theanine. He's got a big L-theanine chub on his desk.
Just like Winnie the Pooh, but for alpha waves.
Something I found interesting when I think I probably started to see L-theanine show up more and more in your mainstream supplements after the removal of like DMAAs and DMHAs and that sort of thing. We started to see L-theanine show up a lot more when caffeine dosages were being pushed a lot higher. But I noticed an interesting, side effect of that in the customer, because we had these guys who had gone from using these substances that were amazing, in my opinion, to heavily dosed caffeine, where we were getting this anxiety response from the caffeine. And I think that in that little interim, some people had become used to this kind of anxiety invoking effect and used that as one of the hallmarks to determine whether the pre-workout was strong or not. So when we started to see the introduction of more theanine, we had people saying, oh, it's not as strong. And I'm like, but are you enjoying the effect more? Like, is this more of a positive experience for you? And they're like, oh yeah, I'm not jittery and I don't feel like Armageddon is imminent, but it doesn't feel as strong. What's your thoughts on that? Do you think that there is anything negative to be said about using theanine with caffeine, or for you it's a much more positive experience?
To be honest, I guess it depends on the activity or task the individual is trying to complete. So for example, if they're trying to work out, arousal needs to be super high. Like training wise in the gym, you want to be maxed out, like, and you don't want anything to sort of dampen the stimulating effects, to be honest. Like it's more, if you look at that inverted U, because you know how to lift weights, it's not like you have to think about how do I press, like how do I dumbbell press?
Yeah. It's not it's not a highly cognitive process that needs to go on there, right?
Exactly. And I've found like in the past, even using like something like rhodiola, like a really stimulating type of rhodiola, like really high in the salidrosides, man, that has had like some pretty epic effects in the gym, like from a mental endurance and the ability to push through. Like I've noticed a huge effect from that over other stimulants in the past. I'm just trying to figure out like what's going on there. How's it?
Yeah, rhodiola is fascinating. They had some rodent studies where they put them in. They did swimming to failure, I think it was. So they did had rodent studies where they'd supplement with the equivalent. It was a huge dose when you put it into the human equivalent, but they had them on high doses of rhodiola, and it was something like it increased their time to fatigue by like 40%, 50%, something crazy. It was huge. It was like the equivalent of like doubling their work capacity. I've seen similar things. About 500 milligrams of rhodiola stacked with about 300 megs of caffeine worked phenomenally. Like it was just like it made you into a workhorse. And I think it has something to do with some oxidation effects that you get with rhodiola, and also Schizandra as another sort of energizing adaptogen. I know that you love rhodiola, Stu, don't you? You've used it.
I do. I love rhodiola. And, one of the things you just mentioned, the rodent studies that have been done, and there is literally like stacks of them. I don't even know how many have been done. But the really cool thing about rhodiola is that a lot of the times when we see some exciting data coming out in the rodent studies, and then we try and emulate those studies in humans, a lot doesn't transfer over. Sometimes some of it does. And, ultimately that's what we're hoping for, is that what we've discovered in the rodent studies will transfer over to the human studies. With the rhodiola, that's one of them where a lot of what we learned from the rodent studies did transfer over to the human studies, which is always really exciting. So rhodiola, huge favorite of mine. And, just circling back to a point that you made there, Lucas, where we're talking about lifting not necessarily being highly cognition intensive, but there is a point at which, having one of these cognitive enhancers can really benefit you in the gym. And it's at that point of failure, or what I would call more mental failure rather than physical failure. So those of us who have been lifting for a long time know that there's a point in, like, let's say our failure set where we want to give up, and our brain starts to say to ourselves, I can't do any more. I can't do another rep. But really, you physically can, if you actually just do it, you can do another rep. Maybe you can do another 3. So it's in this little battle between that little devil and angel on your shoulder when you're in that intense moment of pain. Sometimes having these cognitive enhancers, it can really work towards you in fighting that, and in gaining control over your, over your position with your little demon and angel on your shoulders there, having that focus, having that control, having that drive, and knowing, actually, even in that moment, knowing, no, this is my brain trying to trick me. I can push through. I can do another rep. It's that's where it gets exciting for me. It's not necessarily in, making me think about doing better form or something like that. It's this very definitive moment of trying to push to failure, which ultimately in hypertrophy is what we're trying to do, at least on one set in each exercise group, right?
Yeah. What you mentioned before, Will, about the study you're sort of referencing with rhodiola is the forced swim test, FST.
Yeah.
It's crazy. I'm not against like animal abuse, but those studies just fascinate me like crazy. Like with the forced swim test, it's a measure of like a herb or supplement's antidepressant capacity. And so like that ability to withstand sort of adversity, some of those studies are fascinating, man. Like, have you seen some of the other weird, like there's like the Morris water maze test and all these other wacky.
Oh, again, I think they must have been published before the ethics boards got hold of them, but a lot of them are like absolutely insane. And talking of ones that have with strong antidepressant effects, because I think this is another side of the nootropic coin. I think you've really done a lot of content recently. If anyone scrolls through the recent studies you've been picking apart, things, nootropics to help with not just focus in the gym, but also things like helping with depression, with anxiety, with fear, even, like really remarkable. Because what I found really weird, I sort of really resonated with one of the posts that you had there about, I suppose when you said, you right back before when you said you don't want anything to mute or dampen a stimulant effect, right? And I think that happens a lot with people who've been using caffeinated supplements for a long time. You get to a point where you no longer have that euphoria, that mental arousal you would have gotten initially from a caffeinated supplement. And I see that a lot. And you sort of touched on it a few times recently. So whilst we're looking at common nootropics in pre-workouts, in supplements you'll see, I guess, can you explain that process for us as to why you might get desensitized to caffeine, why that feeling of euphoria and really just, being, there in the mood, in the zone, why that fades over time with supplements and how we can help that with the nootropics?
Yeah, this is a really good point. So, and people need to understand that the function of dopamine is the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. But the thing is, with the opioid network, that's not many people realize that the dopamine system and the opioid system are very closely intertwined. And what gives people that euphoric, that that major mood lift is the agonizing of that mu opioid receptor. So what happens over time with stimulants is that not only do they affect the ability for endogenous opioids to bind to that mu opioid receptor, but they also affect that kappa opioid receptor. So there's three types of opioid receptors: mu, kappa, delta. The kappa one is now being studied as a form of, like, what happens if we antagonize that receptor? How does that affect someone's response to a stimulant? And what they found is that when we antagonize the kappa opioid receptor, it can help to potentiate or strengthen the locomotive effects of dopamine stimulating compounds. So basically, if we antagonize this kappa opioid receptor, we're going to strengthen and help to reinforce it's called locomotive, like the locomotive effects of stimulants. So a good example of this is a herb, like a polyphenol it did come about the scene quite some years ago. You might be familiar with it. It's called a Mentoflavone.
Oh, that was ages ago. Is that? I read about that in some way back when I was looking at new peps. Actually, I came across that. And because looking at the cannabinoid and the opioid systems and stuff, it hasn't really come into the spotlight until somewhat recently. So go on. But I have crossed it.
I'm not familiar with this one, so I'm very interested here.
This one,
that many times when someone mentions something that I'm like a herb or something like that I'm not familiar with. So you've sparked my interest, Lucas.
This one caught my eye, not because of what its effects were like in the brain, but because it was able to increase calcium release in muscle cells, which is part of the performance enhancing effect of caffeine. Caffeine helps release calcium and strengthens muscle contractions, but a Mentoflavone does this 30 times stronger than caffeine. Whoa. But well, let's go back. Let's look at Mentoflavone. So first of all, best way to look at it is you've probably both heard of apigenin from from chamomile and celery. A Mentoflavone is literally just two apigenin molecules bound together, and it's a Mentoflavone found within ginkgo biloba. It's found in St. John's wort and a few other herbs. But at the time when it was really popular in the bodybuilding scene, they were using it from Selaginella temescara or some weird herb. And anyway, basically what they were marketing it for was a pump product, like to strengthen pumps. And in fact, I think Guerrilla Chemist, he may have it in one of his formulas.
For the calcium flux into
I think King of Pumps, maybe. I'm not sure.
Yeah, we haven't had access to that here yet. I really want to get my head around that product because recently we've had some big changes in what's allowed by the TGA for some commonly used vasodilation products, and so it got me looking into like EDFR and looking at the other pathways with vasodilation recently, and it actually had a really interesting loop back through a lot of the choline, acetylcholine, and other nootropics actually had a nice flow-on effect to stimulating endothelial-derived relaxant factor. So it was really, really unique that I hadn't thought previously of the interplay that nootropics can have on giving you a pump in the gym. You really don't put those two together very often, but there is actually a back door.
I'm so glad you brought that up because I've been trying to figure out, and I still I don't understand how this works, and I don't even know who to ask to figure this out. Like, I can't even ask myself because not even.
Which is our first approach. Normally, it's like, well, there's no one else that is geeks out this much on subs. If I don't know it, I don't really know who else to go to now. It's such a weird area.
Lucas just sitting there asking himself. I can just picture it now. So how does this process work? Let me think about that.
I'll get back to you. I'll get back to you.
Well, this is in relation to the fact that, and I'm going to drop the fact that I don't know how it works, but I'm going to explain what happens. So like whenever I use St. John's wort, which is a herb for depression, I sometimes use it for energy because it definitely gives me energy because I think it also interacts with the adenosine receptors like caffeine. Again, not many people talk about that aspect of St. John's wort. It's a adenosine antagonist.
Really?
Yeah.
Right, but it's an anti-anxiolytic. How does that play together? Wouldn't that be the opposite effects? Oh, well, no, sorry. It's an agonist. No, disregard. No, that's complementary action. Yep.
Yeah, the thing with St. John's wort is that it has the energizing effects, but then it gives me these insane pumps, and I just can't figure out why. And it's just like, is it the fact that it's helping retain sodium? Because I've read that it can help to increase intracellular sodium concentrations. And for me, that's often an issue because my blood sodium levels are always freaking super low. But yeah, I don't know, like it's just weird.
St. John wort is such an interesting one that I've wanted to use many times in formulations, but have not been able to because of I believe there's an extreme negative interaction with St. John's wort and certain medications.
Antidepressants in particular, it hates. Yeah, you can't use it with SSRIs at all.
It will accelerate the excretion of the OCP as well, the oral contraceptive pill.
Yeah. I believe even people who are on certain blood pressure medications and stuff like that have to be very careful with St. John's wort. But like, if you're a healthy individual with nothing else going on, it's absolutely amazing. Like, I use it myself, but I've never been able to put it in a formula. I mean, purely because we're a little bit outside of that therapeutic space. You can get it in a chemist and stuff like that, but we've got to be a little bit cautious about what we do and precautions.
I do see that correlation though, and I think it's going to be massively out of scope, but I'm just going to postulate that it has something to do. Any herb that seems to be anti-anxiety herbs like lemon balms, holly, basils, most of those calmative sort of herbs tend to, if you're going to do anything that dampens a cortisol response, that has a massive influence in the vasoconstriction space, right? Like we all know what cortisol does to vasoconstriction. If you want to increase muscle pumps, you want to try and dampen cortisol, is my thought process. And so a lot of your herbs like St. John's, like your chamomiles, like your lemon balms, basils, some of your adaptogens, I would think that might be something along those lines. Maybe it's a cortisol pathway thing.
I asked myself that exact question. I'm like, is it the cortisol path? Is that having like what implications is that having? I ended up getting myself some hydrocortisone. Like actually,
wow.
I'm like, let's go straight to the source.
Wow, that's awesome.
You just forget about that rodent test. Lucas has got himself in the pool tied to a rope, and he's just swimming until he drowns.
Just putting in straight corticosteroids. It's amazing. What happened? How'd it go?
Well, my theory there was if hydrocortisone can act as a mild mineral corticoid like aldosterone, because cortisol also binds to that aldosterone receptor, so it helps to retain salt, which is why people complain about
fluid retention.
Yeah. So I thought that would have an effect on my pumps, but it didn't. So,
Really interesting.
No,
because that's a lesser known pathway, the aldosterone interactions. And I think I think the work of Stan Efferdings and what have you in particular, and Dr. Andy Galpin in the areas of electrolytes, particularly sodium, and the amount that athletes need is it's massively underrated by people. Like, 3 to 5 grams was the recommendation that they were sort of coming to for performance. And, table salt just being sodium chloride, it's only 40 to 60% sodium. So you're talking like 7 to 8 grams of table salt a day, half a tablespoon of salt on your meals a day to hit the an actual recommended sodium intake for performance. And potassium, people have they'll have Powerade or some coconut water, and that's 400 milligrams a glass, but you need like 4.4 grams a day of potassium as well. So a lot of people are in this place of constant electrolyte depletion and wonder why their pumps suck. And it's super interesting that when you were looking down the pathway of the sodium interactions more. So I guess to wheel back to that original one. So I guess we're thinking that the reason that people get desensitized to the use of stimulants in particular and caffeine may well be because we're not focusing enough on the opioid system, and as we're just drumming too much on adenosine and what have you, and not enough on the complementary systems. Is that what you're sort of getting at?
Yes, I think that kappa opioid receptors neglected, and that's what's mediating the reinforcing and locomotive stimulating effects of dopamine stimulants, or dopamine agonists. So, if you look at some of the addiction studies, best one I can think of, it's not legal. It's called salvia divinorum. It's have you heard of it?
I've heard of salvia. I don't know how to get the extra. I've heard of salvia. Because the addiction studies were they're not in our space as much, but you come across them occasionally when you'll see things. I guess some of the early nootropic studies were helpful there, but even some novel ingredients like agantine. Funnily enough, what was it? There was another nootropic they used in this as well. It wasn't theanine. They used another calmative one. It'll come to me. But I've heard of salvia, but I haven't read into it a great deal.
Yeah, the thing is with the research that they did on salvia was to see what effect a kappa agonist would have on what they do is they combine something they know is addictive. Let's say in this example, I'm not saying this is not medical advice. They'll give cocaine, and then they'll give a kappa agonist, and they'll assess the reinforcing or addictive qualities of that lead drug. So then what they figure out is that, this is the effect that, let's say in this case, cocaine or a stimulant has on the locomotive effects. And this is what happens when we antagonize or agonize that kappa opioid receptor. And what they found is that it is probably perhaps the most influential receptor on the reinforcing effects of a drug. Because drugs are anything that has that a strong reinforcing effect means that it's going to have some degree of euphoria. Because why would you ever want to take something that's not going to give you that that lift? That's what's giving you that reinforcement sort of thing.
Yeah, gotcha. And that makes sense, I suppose, because anything that's going to be doing that is going to hijack the dopamine system typically. Because like you said, pursuit of pleasure, right? So I'd imagine those two systems go hand in hand. So are you saying that if people are a lot of our dial this down for our more relatable listeners, I guess, if for the average gym junkie who's been using half a gram of caffeine for the last 12 months.
Can we block this kappa? What can we take to block this kappa pathway? I think that's what we're really getting at, because I'm like, tell me what I can do to block this kappa pathway.
I need to feel caffeine again.
Shut it off. Cut it out. Fuse it closed.
This is the big question. What naturally can we use? So we do have a Mentoflavone that is a kappa antagonist. The dosage range between 100 to 200 milligrams. That's what's being used. If you look at some of the old logs of people using a Mentoflavone, you'll see people say it just lifts their mood, reduces dysphoria, which is the opposite of euphoria. But there are other weird.
Is this a Mentoflavone commercially available? Is this something someone can go and buy from their local chemist or a health food store, or Or you would have to be Lucas, to get your hands on this stuff?
Well, I think there is a patented version called a Mento pump. You might want to. I think a Mento pump is still available. Have you seen it?
It's not Futureceuticals. It's in the US. I'm pretty certain. I've seen that. I've seen the trademark on a product that I wanted to buy, but I couldn't get in through customs. I've seen it used though. It's funny that it's in the pump system, isn't it? It's really unique to see. Yeah. That's what really struck me as bizarre when I was looking at these. I think there's so many more. There's such little understanding of neurotransmitters still. Because what initially spiked it was looking at acetylcholine, and I guess way back at the beginning, we said to some listeners we were going to look at some basic guys, and it might be a good segue into something like Alpha Gpc. Now, what really struck me as interesting was the supplementation of Alpha Gpc around exercise increased contractile power of muscle by 14% off memory. So there's an obvious link between using neurotransmitters to improve nerve signaling to working muscle. So anyone listening, break that down. Using some nootropics can help you basically fire your muscles harder, right? But there's also this other complementary effects of pump. So whilst we're there, let's just do a brief overview on Alpha GPC, because that's on 90% of supplement labels nowadays. Is this something you've used frequently? Is this something you enjoy using?
Yeah, so Alpha GPC is considered like one of the most bioavailable forms of choline. And actually recently I looked into some of the other choline donors, and I've actually found that I did a YouTube video talking about how the worst form of choline, the choline bitartrate, the crappiest form, is actually the one that can increase TMAO, which is the
bad. Yeah, very bad. There's a fascinating podcast that I'm going to send you the link to. For our listeners, TMAO is basically the end result of when it is oxidized. We'll just put it down a wrong pathway. We'll just put it that way for simplification. And what's really interesting, and I'm sure what Lucas will cover now, is that bioavailability of choline is really interesting. Now, choline as the base material, I suppose, is in a lot of natural sources. So anyone listening who wants to try and help support their, if not just brain health, neurotransmitter resources, even something like eggs. Eggs are really great. Whole eggs contain about 250 milligrams of choline. But there's also, you don't eat eggs and become a genius as well. So there's different pathways you have to look at, and that's where Alpha GPC is coming in, man. So proceed with that one.
Yeah, that's where Alpha GPC really fits in. Is like if somebody is looking to deliberately increase the acetylcholine production in the brain, which comes with a lot of benefits. When we increase acetylcholine, we improve learning, memory, concentration, increases salivation, increases the parasympathetic nervous system, has a broad effect, in terms of cognition, but then also, like you mentioned, strengthening muscle contractions, because we need the acetylcholine at the muscle sarcoplasmic reticulum to, increase muscle contraction.
Phenomenal, mate. How good. And I guess dosages we like to see, typically 300 milligrams is about the basal. 600 milligrams is where stuff gets really fun. You really start. Then you basically, like, if every time I push Alpha GPC, anyone of our listeners who are after, if you have to study, if you have to cram, if you're trying to bring on new information as well, if you're someone like me who trains at 4 a.m. and wants to actually not crash as well afterwards and still be able to perform at your desk afterwards, Alpha GPC is bloody awesome. The choline system is really quite useful for, as Lucas said, learning, attention to detail, short-term memory formation. Bloody awesome. So
it's, isn't it so true, Will? Like what you're saying there is, like, there's so many people who could be getting a little bit more out of their brain, right? There's so many people who have jobs or tasks and they could be doing more, but they don't even realize this stuff exists. So I really love that this podcast is getting into that and digging deep into it. Will, you said something earlier that sparked my interest, and I want to dig a little bit more on this. And Will, you probably understand a little bit more about this than me as well. And Lucas, I'm sure a whole lot more than me as well. But you were talking about nootropics' ability to even help to decrease fear. And that's something that I have great interest in, someone who does a lot of public speaking, seminars, things like that. I've lent on beta blockers a lot. And it's something that I'd really love to delve into, because I think that a lot of our listeners reducing that nervous response, or that fear response is something really powerful. And, I know you touched on it, Will, but I'd love to know a little bit more about that for me as well.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's a really cool topic. So one herb, and I'm pretty sure you'd be familiar with it, Will, it's black seed oil. Have you seen those black seeds?
Oh yeah, I've only seen it at one health food store before up in North Queensland. Funnily enough, yeah, I see. You don't see it, you don't come across it regularly.
Well, this is a quote from the Iranian medicine. They say it cures everything, so powerful that it cures everything apart from death itself. It's like
it's like a master anti-inflammatory, powerful NRF2 activator off memory as well. It does fucking everything. It's one of those annoying things to study though, because you end up leaving the study going, well, I didn't really accomplish anything because it just says it does everything. It's like looking at curcumin and studying curcumin, and you're like, oh great, well you can it does every single thing. Like, it works on NRF2, works on antioxidant pathway, detoxification, hepatic support. So you sort of walk away just going, oh. It's just a jack of all trades, but I don't want
to use it because it does too much.
Yeah, you don't know what it's actually doing.
Such a shame. It's just such a shame that it missed that one marker. If it could cure death itself, it'll do everything.
If only.
Unless you can say you cure death itself, I don't want it.
It just fell short. So black seed oil, you're saying, might even be able to cure fear, we're thinking.
Yeah, so and it's funny you say that, because like if you did do a Venn diagram, like with two circles, and you had like curcumin here, black seed here, there would be so many overlapping effects in terms of liver support, hepatoprotective, immune modulating. But the reason why black seed oil can, sort of help with that fear-based response is because it contains that thymoquinone. I think it's TQ is short. And that has been shown to inhibit histone deacetylase. So it's like there's a whole broad class of drugs titled HDAC inhibitors, histone deacetylase inhibitors. And one is, I think, Verunostat, has been used for like treating anxiety and things like that. It's a completely different pathway to beta blockers, by the way. It's not affecting not affecting blood pressure. It's not affecting heart rate. It's not affecting anything like that. It's affecting the ability to convert contextual stimuli into
to an actual response. But basically, it's an interpretation, right, of environment, I suppose, and how that gets received by the brain.
Yeah, it's like it sort of blocks the ability to encode that and reinforce that as like a fearful stimuli.
Who I reckon was probably, had somehow tapped into that pathway? Did any of you guys watch the Where's Wally cartoons when you were a kid? And there would be like this big monster or something in front of him, and he'd just be like, "Oh, look at that! Isn't he a friendly fella?" All these scary, things around him, and he was just, cool as a cucumber.
Wally was just chugging down black seed oil. He was loving it.
He was sipping on black seed for breakfast.
He was loving it.
Yeah, that's Where's Wally's secret juice.
That's a unique pathway, because what I've tried to I keep getting this weird point where I hit a wall, and it's the chicken and the egg scenario, where you try and inhibit or you try and influence a pathway or influence something to get an end result, and you sort of, one thing causes another, but another thing causes it. So everything works in loops in the body, and it's trying to figure out and there's also feedback loops, that like negative feedback loops on everything as well. So what I often find, and this comes in relevance to nootropics, because a lot of things that work best, for example, aren't always going straight to the punchline and trying to just, for example, like using the super basic one that everyone knows commonly, L-tyrosine, right? Amino acid. Now, a lot of people use historically, a lot of people use like your L-dopa, mecunopyrians. These sort of things were half decent, but the most people were well tolerated with using a step back, a precursor, because I find when you try and jump the gun, you tend to have more negative feedback loops than positive in a lot of cases. So, like, I suppose whilst we're there, actually, we should look at tyrosine, because that's one of the most common thing that even if someone like their first day in a sup store, first time using a pre-workout, if you like turn the panel around on your local supplement store, you'll see tyrosine on like 90% of products, right? So we probably should unpack that, and then look at, I guess, some of your, I guess, favorite pathways to hit to really influence like mood and focus and energy. So tyrosine, we'll look at that. That's a super basic one.
Yeah.
And then pathways of action.
Yeah, so tyrosine being the precursor, the substrate, let's look at it as like the building blocks to actually create dopamine. So actually it needs to go down certain sequences. It has to cross various enzymes it needs to be accompanied with certain B vitamins and cofactors to actually make dopamine. But what a lot of people don't realize is the fact that the rate limiting step to convert tyrosine into L-DOPA and then to dopamine is that tyrosine hydroxylase enzyme. Now that enzyme is, fortunately, there are a range of natural botanicals that can increase that enzyme. So it's actually going to increase the production. Cordyceps is one, forscolin's another one. A couple of those can actually, improve that tyrosine to L-DOPA conversion. And that's often why people get that, again, tolerance, or they no longer really respond well to tyrosine, even if they have like 1,000, 2,000 milligrams. It's because that rate limiting step of tyrosine hydroxylase is downregulated from constant influx.
That's a unique one, because we briefly touched on it in our previous episodes, but we never quite got there. When you're looking at things where we have like a really common one is tyrosine and dopamine agonists, right? Like anyone who's using, a pre-workout in the afternoons and say fat burner in the morning, or a lot of these supplements contain tyrosine. We're stimulating dopamine a number of times, as well as in life. A lot of our things like social media is constantly stimulating dopamine. Watching lots of things are dopaminergic, right? So if we've constantly stimulated this pathway, you do, like you said, you get to a point where you can literally dump as much tyrosine as you want and you get no response. So I guess for people who are listening, who are currently using pre-workouts, not really getting that euphoric, mood boost, that drive, that determination you get from dopamine, what Lucas is saying now is this is quite often that, we're looking in the wrong place. We need to focus more on the rate limiting factors. So I guess things like forskolin, you were mentioning, cordyceps as well. These are really, really fun compounds to play with, because they seem to work in another area of the nootropic space, not just where tyrosine to L-DOPA to dopamine. They work on BDNF as well, brain-derived neurotropic factor. Now, that's something that's come in a little bit more recently, because people who are looking at nootropics aren't just looking at performance. They're everyday people looking at things like, how can I stave off Alzheimer's, MS, degenerative diseases? How can I have longer attention span, longer memory? So BDNF has become really, really popular lately. Have you got any particular, I guess, botanicals or amino acids that you like to use to help with this seemingly fountain of youth for your brain? Do you have anything you like to supplement with?
Well, from the BDNF perspective, something as simple as like megadosing taurine, like 2,000 milligrams or 3,000 milligrams of taurine.
Really?
Yeah.
Taurine?
Taurine increases BDNF.
It's such an awesome
everything.
Amino acid, isn't it?
We had taurine pop up in like 5 podcasts now, and
we love taurine.
Oh, it's such an underdog amino acid, but it comes up in every different context. Hey, some people come up for performance, some people come up for heart palpitations, for adrenaline clearance, so many things, testosterone, even bile production. Like it's this one amino acid. It's like a B vitamin. It just pops up all over your chemistry, and we just keep stumbling across it. So where's the interaction there? What how does taurine interact with as a nootropic? Like as a BDNF precursor? How does that work?
Yeah. So taurine, the thing is, taurine has some like broad spectrum effects in the brain. We know it has the Gaba agonism, very mild Gaba A agonist, but then also over time, what I noticed with taurine is that it doesn't have the withdrawal or any sort of habituation or anything. And the key is that because taurine can increase glutamate decarboxylase, so the expression of that enzyme. So over time, it's channeling less and less glutamate and more GABA.
Oh, phenomenal! Now this is a really unique area, and I want this to be somewhere that people pay attention to, because I guess if nothing else, we try and make our listeners mindful of certain things. Now, glutamate versus GABA is something that I only heard in a really unique seminar about sleep quality, and I think the most simplified way I ever heard of it was, he goes, the reason you're all struggling to switch off at night is because you have more votes going towards, flight or fight than you do towards calm. And he said, where that all lies is the balance between glutamate and Gaba. And I wasn't looking at glutamate at the time as even a thing. It wasn't even on my radar. But I guess if anyone who's listening who has struggled with depression, struggled with anxiety, struggles to switch off, who are just constantly tick, 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 and they really run hard. Just that feeling where you're sitting there, and you just feel like something might be wrong. You know, you've got this general feeling of worry, general
unrest.
Unrest, you know, just generally feeling like something's wrong in the world, like something bad's going to happen, or you're just always slightly on edge and you can't figure out why, even if it's nighttime or daytime. Glutamate stimulation is in so many facets of our life now. And where you're covering now, saying there might be a way to stimulate the other part of the pendulum, which is more the GABAergic system, is super valuable. So taurine could be something valuable to help push that pendulum more towards the more calmative, influences.
Absolutely. And what you're referring to is they actually use it in studies. It's called impending doom.
Wow.
That's it. It's this feeling of like there's something not right in the ethos, like something's wrong. Armageddon is imminent.
What else is crazy? We spoke about some of the salts, sodium electrolyte stuff before. This is crazy that on a low salt diet, and when you have if you have insufficient amounts of sodium, it raises glutamate. So that's a great example of how a low salt diet can increase anxiety by increasing glutamate.
Who was switched onto this that I worked with for quite a while was my old coach, Adam Dowling. And I was low salt. I was a healthy dude, and healthy guys are supposed to have low salt, right? That was kind of my school of thinking. And then when I started working with Adam Dowling, he used to have me, he said to me, I want you to get the salt grinder and I want you to do 15 grinds on each of your meals. And I was like, 15 grinds, mate, I'm going to be eating pure salt. But that's what he had me do. And he never really explained the process to me at the time. But some of these things that you guys are discussing now is really unlocking a lot of that for me. The guy would even have me adding sodium bicarbonate to my protein drinks and stuff like that. So he was just pumping me up on salt, and now a lot of this stuff's starting to make sense for me. So thanks a lot for that, Lucas.
Sodium's unique. Sodium's got so many things. When you look at, and even the calcium flux actually is a response to stimulants and so on. Like, I think what I've really put focus on lately is the attention to detail around cellular function and just basic shit. Like, what's the cell's on and off switch? How does it work? How does a cell actually produce energy? How does a cell switch? Yeah. And like looking at like your calcium magnesium fluxes or sodium potassium fluxes and sodium ion channels and these sort of things. And I think that it keeps coming up all over the chemistry of sodium as a really unique way. And I guess if anyone wants a super basic, cheap as shit pre-workout, 5 grams of creatine and probably 2 to 3 grams of sodium, go train and report back, and you will have a filthy fuck off pump. Like, it's really good fun. Sodium's a wicked performance enhancer, which is literally the cheapest possible supplement outside of creatine. Yeah. It's wicked stuff.
Yeah, before you mentioned, just going back to your point around most hormones having a negative feedback, you said something about understanding negative feedback. I want to just quickly add in one quick fact. This is pretty fascinating. I know it's off topic, but
please do.
The hormone oxytocin.
Yes,
we love it.
We all love it.
We love it.
We love hormone.
I'm so glad you went there, Lucas, because this was something that I actually have written down on my notepad here, saying we have to cover on, because we get so focused on acetylcholine, serotonin, dopamine, blah blah. No one's looking at it, and it's something that gets muted and numbed by other particular pathways that get overstimulated as well. So please go on. So oxytocin, I was hoping we'd end up here at some point.
Yeah, what's crazy with this hormone is that, and I saw this study, it was insane. It was like, oxytocin is one of the hormones that has a positive feedback loop, not a negative feedback loop, which means that it's like, TRT, testosterone, take it, endogenous cut down, oxytocin, take it, the body makes more of it.
Wow.
Your ability to produce oxytocin increases the more oxytocin you manage to incite.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. You would almost always see the opposite to be true. This I did not know. So, yeah.
I find it.
How and why?
Well, I mean, I still haven't. A couple of my friends have experimented with oxytocin nasal spray, and I'm going to get some soon. I'm just cautious of who I'm with, what I take.
That's like Cupid's arrow, isn't it? If any of our listeners, I suppose
it's the love potion.
It's the love potion. It is. Oxytocin is a beautiful little neurotransmitter. That's typically, things like when you kiss. It's basically a love and pleasure hormone, I guess you'd sort of say.
I was reading a study. About oxytocin, actually, Will, and this was focused around women and the skin-on-skin touch effect. Yeah. So they found that far more prevalent or a far higher effect in women than men anyway. But then when their skin was touched, their oxytocin production skyrocketed just from physical touch of the skin. And the strange thing was that the lighter the touch, the more oxytocin release. So there was actually a pressure function of this physical touch. More pressure, less oxytocin production. Lighter touch, more oxytocin production. And we've all experienced this to some extent, right? Someone just lightly touches the fingers down the back of your neck, and you get this kind of like this, and it's more than just that it tickles, right?
Isn't that clever?
And a far more profound effect in women than men.
Isn't it clever?
Which is strange, also.
But
I'm gonna find that study because I don't know the numbers, but it's really, really bloody interesting. I'm going to send that to you, Will, and Lucas as well. Very cool stuff, oxytocin. And very powerful if you know how to manipulate it in someone.
Oh man, it's insane. In terms of, I guess we can look at it as the bonding hormone, but the attachment hormone as well. That's why I was saying before, I've got to be careful if I'm going to be either exogenously using it.
Fall in love with the broomstick sitting beside you, Lucas.
It's beautiful, but I think it's there's
bromine.
It's very theobromine looks at it. That's why women love chocolate. Chocolate makes you love. But what's the I guess what are some common I suppose agonists of oxytocin? Because I really actually haven't looked down this rabbit hole previously, to be honest. I've done bugger all reading with this, so I think the listeners get a lot of value looking at how to stimulate these more, your oxytocin, your Gaba, more of the calming, more loving. These sort of pathways be a lot better than we're always looking at things to drive performance and things that stimulate, like your adenosine inhibitors. And, it'd be really nice to look at the flip side of the coin where we try to calm down, get that, attachment, bonding, all, the quality time sort of vibe. Well, agonists, things that boost oxytocin.
Yeah. So there's St. John's wort, because by virtue of it upregulating this 5-HT1A receptor, which actually governs ACTH, prolactin, oxytocin, cortisol, all of these hormones. By upregulating, and I've noticed this with St. John's wort personally, I do feel like I'm more empathetic, way more empathetic on St. John's wort. Whereas without St. John's wort, I'm pretty I just want to work. Don't get in my way. Just I'm, very
takes the St. John's wort and watches the TV commercial with the baby and starts
watches the Notebook. Is that you actually you've mentioned this 5-HT alpha 1 receptor? You mentioned this on your podcast with Ben Greenfield, who's another absolute just credit to our industry, and I've seen it pop up in a few places. Can you better explain this? How antagonizing this receptor what it can lead to? Because I've seen it I've seen it pop up more and more in a lot of stuff that content you're putting out. And you mentioned there it seems to be upstream of things like ACTH and your adrenal outputs, and so anything that's upstream of your adrenals is a very interesting space for me personally. So could you go sort of deliberate, I guess, the function of this receptor and things that are good or bad, I suppose, with it?
Yeah. So I'm glad we're going to start at the top. So the 5-HT1A receptor is one of 14 serotonin receptors in the brain. There are many, and 5-HT1A is it's almost like the gatekeeper. It regulates total serotonin pool in the brain. But there are different types of 1A receptors. There's the presynaptic and the postsynaptic. What happens with SSRI drugs is that they desensitize the postsynaptic 5-HT1A receptor. So it's the autoreceptor. And so what that leads to is there's no longer the gatekeeper that regulates total serotonin production in the brain. So what that leads to is an imbalance or an excess amount of serotonin, similar to what ashwagandha, I've spoken about how ashwagandha can unfortunately desensitize this 1A receptor and elicit a lot of the negative effects similar to SSRIs, which is the blunting of reward and pleasure.
Yes, you did. We unfortunately didn't get you to cover that on the last episode, but you're probably the only person because ashwagandha has exploded, right? And obviously it was always useful in the Ayurvedic space. Naturopaths have loved it for a long time. But I think it's gotten, it got a lot of attention, and then it was in everything. And I think looking at some of those deleterious effects are useful. One thing to clear up for people who are looking at, there's been a trend in the supplement industry to put them in pre-workouts. And one thing that I was going to loop back to at the start was when we were saying, putting dampeners in pre-workouts is just retarded. If you want to try and ramp up if you want to try and ramp up your sympathetic state, really get you in the zone and going, and then dumping in something which is a GABAergic agent, which drops out cortisol, it's really just like, it's just contradictory action. So when Lucas originally said in the podcast at the start, you don't really want things that are dampeners in your stimulant stacks. Using herbs like ashwagandha, like the St. John's wort, around times where you need performance is not ideal. So if you're seeing it in pre-workouts, it's just not really, the formulator might not be thoroughly across the plant. Negative effects of ashwagandha, I suppose. This is the other place, oxytocin and ashwagandha overdosing, I suppose. Let's run there.
Yeah. So unfortunately, like, we're seeing more and more threads like on Reddit and Longevity, and a bunch of guys reporting similar effects to what you would experience if you're on an SSRI, or if you get what's known as like PSSD, which is post SSRI sexual dysfunction, which is basically characterized by blunted orgasm, blunted pleasure, blunted arousal effects. Like I said before, ashwagandha unfortunately can induce, it can shift the balance more towards the 2A, the 5-HT2A receptor, and desensitize that 1A receptor. And that's why, unfortunately, a lot of people get anhedonia, which is the inability to experience pleasure from ashwagandha. And this anhedonia it can be crippling because the effects are not just whilst you take ashwagandha. We're talking about almost like an epigenetic switch, that longer term, it's having such a potent anti-stress effect. But by virtue of, that anti-stress, by all means, ashwagandha is awesome for lowering cortisol.
So that's something I want to ask just quickly, Lucas, while we're on this point. Is there a cumulative effect, or is there a dosage we could safely take, say, every day and not end up at this point? Or is there some sort of cumulative effect where we reach like a saturation point and then we're in trouble? Should we be breaking on and off ashwagandha, or should we just keep our dosage low on a regular basis?
Well, it depends on the extract, because the KSM 66, which is often, I call it KSM 666, the devil.
The devil plant.
That one there is, I spoke to Matt Legg from ATP Science, the extraction there, and he said that it's not a typical extract. It's not how they would traditionally use it. It was like way overdosed in terms of the withanolides or something. So it doesn't actually mimic what we would have traditionally had. And this is why extraction ratios and amounts and constituents really make a difference in terms of dosing.
Yeah, because like a lot of your trademarked ashwagandhas, Sensoril is 10%, but it's also extracted in a way more closely to the traditional methodology as well. But people have gone to, just like with things like, beta-alanine or D-aspartic acid, they'll see one study where it has a certain dose sort of mentioned, or one standardization mentioned, and that's the gold standard apparently according to everyone. So the 5% with analoids combined, it seems to be the industry standard. I've used KSM in my thermogenics, funnily enough, which I sort of build into an adrenal element of that product. It's worked well in this capacity because of that process. It is quite potent in the helping people with anxiety throughout the day. Anecdotally, seems to be really quite powerful. But I have the anhedonia side of things, like just numbing and muting of general emotions is a really prevalent sort of feature that I personally have experienced with it for sure. Because like you, when I experiment, I like to go, top end of the ranges and see what can be done. And I'm talking like a gram and a half a day, like really going hard at it. So I guess with Stu's question, that's probably very valuable for our listeners. So is it something we should use cyclically? Do we maybe even, if we're desensitizing that 1A receptor, do we even use it in conjunction with something to restore that balance, and that can help? What's your best approach, and how would you use the plant then, knowing that?
Well, that's why I was fascinated with St. John's wort, because that's one of the only other herbs that can help to upregulate that 5-HT1A receptor. That's why I was really fascinated into it. And I was also very averse to St. John's wort. I was like, oh, don't really want to use this. It's got so many interactions. Like, I don't like it. But like right now, it's the only natural compound really that I know of that can increase the 1A receptor. I mean, we've got pharmaceutical. I've used another pharmaceutical drug, cyproheptadine. I don't know if we spoke about this in the first podcast. Periactin. Have you heard of it?
That's my memory, but
no.
I'll have to review the episode.
Yeah. But that can also do it. That just makes you hungry, makes you eat everything in your sight.
Yeah. Cool.
But let's say in absence of those,
so St.
how are we
John
taking our ashwagandha?
To tolerate ashwagandha?
Yeah.
How are we taking it effectively so that we get the maximum positive benefit from it without?
I would keep dosage around 50 to 100 milligrams a day, or max. Yep. Like
you could do that. You would say you could do that consistently and not risk this kind of zombie-like dead emotion effect.
Well, it depends on the individual. Some guys can use it without any of the numbing effects. Other guys are really sensitive. I think it's a genetic predisposition to stubborn 5-HT1A receptors sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, gotcha.
So if you're dead inside already, it's probably going to make it worse.
Where's black seed oil?
Get the black seed oil. Is there anything? So would you say for people who are currently using it then, because I think one of the best things that have come out of the supplement industry in the last few years is probably a big focus in the adrenal space, and it's brought a lot of people who don't usually use supplements into this space and really got some attention, because I think so many people now with such hectic lifestyles we lead. I've certainly made my life's work for the last few years looking at how to help people deal with anxiety, cortisol, stress. So I guess people using it currently in a therapeutic sense to help with cortisol, particularly in the sleeping sense and that sort of thing. So you recommend then, like Stu asked, do you recommend cycling on and off to avoid this effect? Do you think it's just that, do you think a period of time on or off is smarter then, or just keep the dose super low? What's your best approach?
I guess it depends on the individual. If they feel like they've had a really stressful day, or they need that extra anti-stress support, then by all means, have 100 to 150 milligrams, when you need it. But again, what is the function? Let's take a step. What is the function? What purpose is ashwagandha serving? Is it, if it's to lower cortisol or to increase Gaba, we can do that with other compounds, can't we? We can lower cortisol with phosphatidylserine, theanine,
magnolia, Rehmannia. There's a million plants to do it. I just find it quite interesting because I think there's, and it's sort of a question that I think is relevant to a lot of people, but also I used to just say to people, stress less, right? I used to say, when I do these seminars and I do talks on the adrenal area and looking at helping people with stress management stuff, it used to be a case I'd be like, okay, guys, now you know that what stress does to your body and what it does hormonally. Let's just try and have less of it, right, people? Because it's bad. And that wasn't always well received.
His initial seminars were 10 minutes long, by the way.
It was just chill down, everybody. It was just yelling at a room of people to calm down. No, not anymore. Now I try and look at it, holistically and go, look, the stressors, their sources aren't going away. We need something to deal with it. And I don't know. I used to try and do the same, where I'd be like, look, if I just need, every now and then I'm having a red hot day, I should probably, try and dampen that a bit in the evenings. Now I've almost changed my opinion now to be more so that you sort of need, I sort of use them year round, because I think the intensity with which stressors bombard you, it's almost like you need to give it to your body as a way to bulletproof it, to give it that resilience to bounce back. Because I for one know that if I'm not using adaptogens before bed, in particular, I'm just awake all night. The sleep quality is rubbish, and I can see that in the data as well with my Garmin tracking, REM sleep and deep sleep and different cycles. so I wouldn't say there's much of a practical alternative if you.
Will, I've actually got a theory or a bit of a hypothesis behind this, and I'm in agreement with you. I almost feel that there is a need to exogenously supplement in order to keep these cortisol or these stress levels down. And I have this theory that it's because we've evolved over hundreds of thousands of years as whether it be cave dwellers or nomadic people, and we produce these survival hormones, right? Adrenaline, fight or flight response, cortisol as a secondary response to tell us, either there's predators about, there is not a good food supply here, or there is no shelter. And cortisol is like a hormone that's actually designed to really tell us things are not right here. You need to move on. You need to go to more fertile grounds where there's better shelter and less predators. Now, we still have those evolutionary traits in us, but for the last couple of 100 years, we can't just be nomadic and walk away from it. We're stuck with the stressors. The bear at the front of the cave is there every single morning. If we were cave dwellers, well, let's go somewhere where there's no bears. So we can't do that anymore, right? We're grounded. We have jobs that we work for 10, 15 years at a time where the bear is there every day. The fight or flight response is being triggered all the time. The body knows that this area that we're currently living in is of imminent danger to us, but we can't just leave. And I would, I guess, pose the hypothesis that if we could leave, then potentially those stress hormones would come down, but we can't now. So we need to do something exogenous to handle that. What do you think about that theory, Lucas and Will?
I'm in the exact same boat as you, man. I fully agree with exactly what you said, because the environment, it's not enough to just, try and tolerate things by yourself without any sort of support, because the form of stresses that we're under today is just insane. Like, it's just, we're under attack in so many different ways. And we're not really designed to be living like this. We're living with our phones and things like that, and just constantly bombarded. And that's why all of these supplements and nootropics, they're just making up for what we, basically, like, it's just making up for the fact that we've moved so far away from the old way of living, and now it's just bring us back to equilibrium, if that makes sense.
Yeah, our physiology is at ends with our current lifestyle and environment. And I think in an ideal world, because I had this chat with a naturopath as well recently on the road, where they're saying like, you shouldn't need to use melatonin regularly. You shouldn't be using adaptogens regularly in the doses you do before bed. And I'm like, okay, well, there shouldn't be constant stresses. There shouldn't be a need to work 15-hour days. There shouldn't be, but we didn't evolve in that scenario, and our physiology has evolved to deal with a very prehistoric lifestyle, unfortunately. So we're very at ends with our physiology, and I find that's where biohacking is so valuable. And trying to outsmart these things doesn't always lead to the conventional supplementation, but they can be remarkably useful and help us become more bulletproof to our current environment. Like, one of the unique things, when we had like the likes of Luke Lehman on and so on, things like using melatonin supplementation throughout the day. People would look at you weirdly, even for using melatonin, they treat you like a criminal almost in Australia's healthcare system. But, throughout the day, drop blood pressure by 10 points within half an hour. Like, huge drops in blood pressure, huge drops in cortisol, like 20, 30, 40% drops in salivary cortisol, like huge, right? And he was using that to biohack people who had severe anxiety. So there's some really valuable spaces. And I would love you to delve into, I suppose, the flip side of this, I suppose, is, we've covered the nootropics for the performance side, the dopamine agonist, acetylcholine agonist, looking at those. We then briefly touched on the fear, anxiety, and even oxytocin spangle. Now let's look at the really common stuff, which is helping people deal with stress, anxiety, and sleep, because sleep hacks and any supplements help with sleep, I think, is something that any one of our thousands of listeners can go and try tonight and and get value immediately from it. So, anxiety and sleep, what's your protocol look like before bed? And what would you recommend for people to help them really bulletproof, that make themselves resilient to the stresses of today?
Yeah, I have this quote, good sleep starts as soon as you wake up. And it's basically first thing in the morning is getting that sunlight exposure or doing some degree of like sun gazing, because like, have either of you ever sun gazed at all?
Yeah, I have used watching the sunrise as a method for reducing depression for a long time. Amazing stuff.
It does work, man. Even though there's no research on like how it works or whatever, but like that stuff, it definitely works. And those days that I get that morning sunlight exposure, my sleep quality is so much better that night.
I know why, funnily enough, and it took so much deep diving, and it was down a weird rabbit hole. I found it. I fucking found it. I was trying to figure out what happens here. There's another system, right? So there's because I was looking at circadian rhythm too simplistically. I looked at it from your cortisol rhythms. I looked at it through. There's another pathway. It's called your nuclear clock. Funnily enough, is the sort of layman's term for it. It's in the roof of your mouth. Weird enough. As soon as you detect sunlight in the morning, it sets your clock to go to bed 12 to 15 hours later. So as soon as you hit that light in the morning, it tells you when you're going to bed already. So when you've seen the sun in the morning, your body already knows when you're going to sleep, give or take 3 hours. And it starts that cascade beautifully in line with that. But if you're in I've done this experiment recently. I have quite a dark apartment. Like it's a shift worker's dream, but it's quite useful.
It's more of a dungeon.
It's a dungeon. It's a cave, right? And I get really, but I thought, you know what?
Chains, water dripping from the ceiling.
I thought let's make the most of this. Let's actually see how this impacts things. So in the morning, I'm an early riser. Quite comfortably get 4 or 5 a.m. without an alarm. If there's no light though in this dark apartment, if there's no light, 6, 7 a.m. rolls by, and slow to wake up, groggy. That light exposure really plays a very crucial part in not only the sleep that night, but the morning, starting that cascade, that we need to really get it, energized, get arousal happening. It really,
Let's
really
unpackage that a little bit more, even Will. You look at how we've evolved. We've evolved on this planet alongside a rising and setting sun, and we're mammals that are designed to be awake during the day when there's light and asleep during the night. Now, until the light bulb was invented, essentially, we did operate just through those hours. You're not really going to get much done under candlelight or by the light of a fire. So people rose as the sun rose and slept as the sun set. And we have evolved in that manner. And for the last few hundred years, we just have gone and thrown that out the window. Now we do shift work. We literally can create synthetic sun right through the night and do as much work as we want to. We turn on the synthetic sun when we decide that we're going to wake up, and we turn off the synthetic sun when we decide that we're going to go to sleep, and our systems are rattled. We're trying to, just because we decided to undo hundreds of thousands of years worth of evolution on this planet, it's not going to work. We're going to come unstuck, right? And I think probably, the invention of the light bulb, it probably started some of this cascade effect.
That was very much in your space, actually. I saw recently, touching on blue light and general. So I suppose to kickstart your daily routine, I suppose, and things you'd help recommend with people, waking upon rise, light exposure as soon as possible. I know that I know that obviously actual sunlight's the best. We're coming into winter now, obviously, and you in Melbourne will probably not see the sun now until next year. So I guess it would, what's our next step in our daily routine to bulletproof us from stress and get us ready for the night coming, I suppose? What's the next sort of hack you use in your daily routine?
Well, and then after sun gazing, I usually get on my treadmill desk, and I actually try and get 10,000 steps in before my first meal.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm doing that. I mean, I'm doing that from like a mental clarity perspective, and also like productivity. Like I get so much done in those first 3 hours of the day. Like from a body composition perspective, like it's insane. Just like when I first bought the treadmill desk at the start of lockdown, didn't change my diet at all. Kept it. My diet's not even that clean. Like I do cheat meal quite a lot, and like my body fat just drops. Like my core area just shredded up like crazy, man.
I've seen a few pictures. You've put up, Lucas, and you're actually, you see Lucas in a button up shirt and doing his, but he's pretty ripped. This guy, like he's lean, and he seems to be lean all the time. Something you're doing is working. So what was it? Treadmill desk. I'm going to go and eBay that right now.
the thing is, not only do I, talk the talk, but I walk the walk. You know what I mean?
You got to. I think you got to live it, because otherwise it's sort of almost irrelevant. I find, and people can smell it on you when you're not practicing what you preach. I think, but I think increase, to simplify that even to people who haven't got a treadmill desk, we could probably say try and increase your daily steps if you're not tracking them right now, and particularly in the mornings. I find that's really, really quite cool for boosting, particularly like ketones in the brain, for example. Is quite, that's what I put it down to, because I'm the same. Like I did a 5K run this morning before I jumped on here, because it really clears out your brain, really help. I think it also burns through. I almost call it like, it's like a burnout in an old, when you're trying to prime an engine, you're trying to burn through the bad fuel or anything that's left in the lines. I burn it out, ready to, and you sort of run cleaner. It's like in oversimplification, but yeah, you get up, and I find burning everything left in the system before you dump in primes you to, one, you're pretty much by then probably dipping into more ketones for fuel. So your brain functions pretty good. But that's a really good one that most people can do. Get up, do some sort of exercise, get moving, burn some calories, get your heart rate up a little bit. That also reinforces that morning cascade that the sun gazing will do. And that'll really cement that first half of the circadian rhythm. So they're two really good, easy hacks that people can do without even looking at a supplement, without looking at anything else. Just get up, look at the sun, go for a walk, like done, easy. So, and I guess, and moving further down the rabbit hole there, mate. So where's our next step go for you? What's it look like after you've done your half marathon before you start work? How's that go?
Then the first meal for me is always like a high protein, high fat meal. So like I still, somewhat, I don't know, in ketosis almost. And then the following, I tend to carb backload. So I respond really well to that. And that's because I train most of the time, like 4:35 p.m. So yeah, basically after the steps, get that first meal, like high protein, high fat, and then essentially shift all the carbs back towards the evening. Because I do find that, and this goes against most, research, that like a very, very carb heavy meal, 1 to 2 hours before bed, even though I'm not like carb intolerant, I still find that it just makes me feel less stressed. And we know that, glucose intake and adequate liver glycogen storage and things like that can help with, dampening the cortisol response. So does
insulin as well. That's what I get a lot of people on. But again, chicken and the egg, it's weird. Cortisol impairs your glucose tolerance, poor sleep, but also insulin blunts cortisol. So it's like, well, one will block the other, but the other one blocks the first one. So I recommend small carb meals frequently in the afternoon, or like you said, just, if all else fails, just dump 100 grams of carbs before bed and you'll sleep like an angel. It's really, really fun how that works. So that's a good one. Definitely, a lot of people like really get scared of carbs before bed, funnily enough, but it's a really useful hack if you want to jump in. It puts yourself, it boosts a lot of really nice neurotransmitters too, carbohydrate consumption. So that's quite good. More fats in the morning helps with cognitive function, helps get, I suppose if you're after body composition changes as well, it's actually quite handy keeping insulin a bit lower in the morning, and then moving through to the evening, more carbs to try and again help lower some stress hormones. So that's a good one. And then I'm going to guess there's probably some supplements poking their head up very soon if we're in this part of the evening.
Yeah, so then around 5:30, 6 o'clock, that's when I put on my like blue blockers, so blue blocking glasses. And then after dinner, I've been playing around with, I don't know if I mentioned the seaweed on the previous podcast. It's a brown seaweed called Eclonia cava. That one there is phenomenal for sleep. Like,
have you that's very high in fucoxanthin. Have you seen these new studies on fucoxanthin?
For
comes from the brown seaweed extract for fat loss.
Yeah.
And they're really, really profound. Studies on fat loss in women specifically. And this fucoxanthin that is found in brown seaweed extract. It's like, man, I wish I had the data in front of me right now, but I was reading this study probably 6 months ago that I read this study, which is why it's a bit foggy for me, but some absolutely profound results for women's weight loss, especially. And I dare say that some of that could be transferred over to men. It's just that this particular study was looking at postmenopausal women actually. So really, really awesome stuff. Fucoxanthin is one to do some reading up on there, Will, as well. It's
good for sleep quality too, apparently. So how's the sleep? Where's the interaction there?
Well, Eclonia cava is it shares a lot of similar properties to L-theanine. It increases alpha waves in the brain. It is a GABA A positive allosteric modulator, so it's not agonizing the GABA A receptor. It's just making the body's own GABA more receptive to the receptor. So like it's opening up the channel, basically allowing GABA to bind to. But then obviously it also lowers cortisol. It's considered one of the strongest C-based antioxidants on the planet, Ecclesia cava. And yeah, I mean, it's also very neuroprotective. And just from my dad's responses and like a few of my friends, like the reason, well, first of all, I was firstly interested in Ecclesia cava because I saw one study that compared it to Viagra and it outperforms Viagra.
Wow. Yeah, right.
It's being used in a lot of pump products as well because it increases. It's an ACE inhibitor, like it's a natural angiotensin ACE inhibitor.
Wow. Yeah, right. That's a unique space. I think that's got a lot of unique functions there. Probably a decent iodine donor as well, I'd imagine. So for the thyroid side of things, probably quite handy. That might even be a link in the fat loss study, Stu, that we didn't think of. Anything with iodine, I find a lot of people are deficient in iodine.
So in this actual study, will they just use the purified fucoxanthin extract? They weren't giving them the seaweed. That's right. Yeah, it was just fucoxanthin.
Low dose as well. It was like 5 to 10 milligrams. Something.
Yeah, it wasn't much, and some profound outcomes. So I actually have some fucoxanthin at my at the back of my shop that I've been dabbling with myself.
Chuck us on. I want to actually start experimenting with fucoxanthin again.
Yeah, it's really, really cool stuff, and it tastes like nothing. It tastes like it has a very almost just a grainy bread sort of taste. The purified extract powder, it tastes like nothing. It doesn't taste like seaweed. So it's very, very cool stuff.
Okay, cool. That's a really valuable one. I love these. There's always some interesting extracts we can always bank on Lucas to provide. So the seaweed, the brown seaweed before in the evenings around that sort of dinner time, we're going to start throwing that in, and that's obviously a bit of a cortisol modulator, helping with the theanine-like effects. Out of curiosity, do you use theanine? I've used high doses of theanine in that same sort of window. Like I'll dump, say, 200 milligrams of theanine in that same sort of period as well. That seems to work quite nicely also. Have you got any other sort of interchangeable subs you throw in there as well, just in case people don't have a small ocean nearby?
Well, actually, I respond really well to GABA, just regular GABA. Even though people argue that it doesn't.
When we could use that in the supplement industry.
It's so good. People, if people just use that, again, similar to melatonin, use GABA throughout the day, it just drops like all-cause mortality. It just fixes everything for stress. Like 500 megs of GABA throughout the day regularly is beautiful stuff. What dose do you run actually, mate? What's your sort of evening dose for GABA? Because it goes quite high with a lot of people.
I don't need to dose high with GABA, just like 250 to 500 milligrams, just like literally. It's literally in the smallest amount of water, like maybe 100 ml of water, shot it and then go straight to bed. And I know it helps my sleep dramatically.
Well, that fast. That's interesting because some people use that a bit differently. For our listeners, GABA's, as we spoke about before, that GABA gets, it's not depleted, but it's just not quite favorable, the balance between your glutamate, your sort of anxietic, stimulatory, excitatory sort of neurotransmitter and GABA, whereas GABA's is that nice, warm, cozy, dopey feeling yet before bed when you're ready to switch off and wind down is the best way to describe the felt effects of GABA. Now, ranges in studies show anywhere from 500 milligrams up to 3 grams you'll see quite commonly used. And you're saying more so the lower end of that spectrum is fine. So, like 250 milligrams even. And you said directly before bed. I've seen a lot of people, saying, an hour before bed, even 2 or 3. Like some people use it to sort of in the cascade downwards. Do you find that acutely before bed, like right before bed, is what you'd recommend for GABA?
Yeah, based on my experiments, like immediately before bed is what works best. And then also if I'm really struggling, like I know that I'm going to have a really shitty sleep, I'll always have a little bit of GABA by my bedside table. And if I wake up during the night, I might take a quick sip and it's guaranteed back to sleep within 5 minutes.
It's super interesting sleep because there's a few pathways you have to hijack. You've got to get the serotonin to melatonin pathway happening. You need to look at boosting GABA. and you need to drop cortisol. So you've got to sort of, and if any one of those three symphonies are out of whack, then the music doesn't work, right? Like you've got to sort of look at it from a few ways. And you'll see this with people who, if there's any stress heads who are listening, people who have struggled with anxiety or have got a lot, very full on jobs, what have you, I'll quite often hear people say they'll go to the doctor with sleep issues. If they're lucky enough to dodge the antidepressant prescription, then they'll usually get melatonin. Now, the melatonin, they might run home, give that a try. And a lot of times they're still not switching off. And they're like, oh, what's this? This is garbage. And then they've come to you at the supplement store going, oh, I've tried everything, end quote, to help sleep. It's like, well, that just wasn't the pathway that was the problem. Yes, you've probably got too much blue light in the evening. Yes, your melatonin production is probably pretty pathetic, but let's also look at the other pathways. So that was really cool that you've so far targeted the cortisol pathway with the brown seaweed, the GABA, touching that pathway as well. Now, do you, interestingly enough, what's your stance on melatonin supplementation as well?
I'm glad you asked. So, all right, my stance on melatonin is it depends on the person's goal. So, like, for example, melatonin's best utilized, in my opinion, like only following like changing time zone, or if they're using it to have a therapeutic effect. So, like, we know it's good for like breast cancer. It's good as an anti-inflammatory, antioxidant. We know a lot about all that. But if somebody were to pick melatonin and they want to actually take it regularly, then the maximum I would ever suggest for a regular use would be 300 micrograms.
Wow.
Not 3 milligrams, 300 micrograms sustained release by life extension.
Yeah, wow. Okay, this might rock a lot of people, because I think it, like a lot of people say like the now foods of iHerb or what have you, and it's 3 milligrams, 5 milligrams. I've even heard some experimental people though really like play with this and run very high doses of melatonin as well. And again, for the things like being lesser known fact, it's one of the strongest antioxidants on the planet. It's remarkably potent as an antioxidant. So for free radical scavenging and reducing ROS and stuff, it's really quite cool. But I guess what are some of the, I guess if people are using melatonin regularly, like I, for example, use it regularly because I have a lot of screen times in the evening, or usually on the laptop, wrapping up some work for some admin for the business. And even with, turning down brightness, trying to minimize blue light, there's still just that, like I said before, adds to physiology part. If you have lights in your eyes, until in the evening, sleep's pretty impaired. So would you say that's pretty much a rule of thumb? Don't use melatonin unless you have to, or is it sort of not a smart investment regularly, or are there feedbacks you want to flesh out there?
Yeah, I mean, I spoke to Victor Black about this. I don't know if you've seen Victor Black. He's been posting a lot of content recently about melatonin. So really, your goal should be to try and make it as best, like you'd rather make you allow your body to make melatonin than to take melatonin. You'd have to do like there's the Dutch. Have you heard about the Dutch test?
The Dutch test, yep.
No, if you're talking, it's definitely different to the Dutch test that I used to use as a teenager at sleepovers. So, tell me about your Dutch test, Lucas.
Well, that can basically determine your melatonin metabolites. So it can help to understand how much melatonin you've actually produced overnight. So if you wear your blue blocking glasses from 6 p.m., you go outside, do some earthing, and then take all of the cofactors like B6. You have a bit of turkey, you have like maybe 2 kiwi fruit, a couple of walnuts, pistachios. Like, you are giving your body the best possible chance to make melatonin.
Lucas, I just got to stop you there. I could just imagine coming to dinner at your place and being served the weirdest combination meal.
Just turkey and kiwi fruit. I'm just staring there.
Lucas comes out, dinner is served. There's a bit of turkey, a couple of kiwi fruit, some walnuts.
I love
what
tropical.
The hell?
I always love some tropical fruits and nuts with my dairy. Imagine that. Here's a pint of warm milk and some kiwi fruit, and I'll be like, "Well, thanks, mate, for that spiteful dinner." What a fucked up dinner that is.
Dinner is served.
Yeah,
He's got his chef hat on.
Enjoy. Here's alongside a magnesium and a vitamin B6 tablet. Here's some Barocca, and we'll mix that in the milk. Why not? Fuck it. We've already ruined dinner. A nice milky Barocca. Okay, but that's a really clever point though. All fuckery aside, I think the idea of putting in some precursors, putting in some naturally occurring cherry, Montgomery tart cherry extract is quite good as well. So some cherries have got some naturally occurring melatonin as well. Do you like the idea of using, and this is like everyone has a different opinion on it, so I'd love to hear yours, serotonin precursors before bed as well, 5-HTPs or tryptophans, and sort of giving that similar idea to the tyrosine, L-dopa, dopamine, giving, tryptophan to serotonin to melatonin. Do you recommend that supplementation, or do you see issues with the whole serotonin pathway when you start supplementing with things like 5-HTP?
Well, first of all, I'd rather use tryptophan than 5-HTP. I'd rather start as far back as possible. So like a very low dose tryptophan on its own, away from protein, like 250 to 500 milligrams. If somebody feels like they want to create their own melatonin production. But to be honest, like I experimented with like tryptophan and other serotonin precursors, and a lot of people do as well. But geez, like the dampening effects the next day, like
it's brutal. It's horrible. It's like being on antidepressants. It's really, you're just muted and lost all motivation. Because I had a recent, I wanted to experiment with this. I purchased a sleep aid over the counter that I knew was stupidly dosed in this area. Like it was made stupidly if it was taken in isolation, but I wanted that stupid amount of serotonin activity to see what happens when you, because of chronic melatonin supplementation. I was like, okay, let's try it another way. No melatonin and just dump a heap of precursors and I think it had both 5-HTP and tryptophan as well. And it was like 500 megs and then like 100 megs of 5-HTP. It just was stupid. Anyway, so I woke up and just doughy, lacked motivation, just didn't want to get out of bed even, just like, meh, the world can go by, I don't care. It was a horrible feeling. It was, and it took a lot of biohacking to get out of it. It took ages to clear it. I think dopamine with CompT, everyone has, pretty capable clearance times on dopamine, but serotonin for me lingered for ages.
I'm actually a lover of 5-HTP, but not for bedtime. I like 5-HTP in the morning with a stimulant. I find that I get it will give my stimulant kind of this euphoric edge, where I'm not just getting that stimulating effect. I'm getting some sort of that positive reward centers being triggered a little bit, but not too much. I think that, less is more with some of these things. If you're going to use them, err on the side of minimalism with a lot of these things. But definitely a profound compound. I think just maybe not necessarily being used for the purpose of increasing melatonin at nighttime.
How do you use serotonin precursors, Lucas? Well, in what situation would you recommend those, I suppose? And how do you use them? Are you more of some people use them in the morning to start that cascade off, other people use them at night. Do you use them regularly, or do you recommend people use them at all?
I mean, I went through a period where I used them for maybe like a week or so, and then I dropped them straight away because I just couldn't figure out any potential use for it. And that's because of my brain chemistry. I've got the MAO-A SNP where like I've already got low monoamine oxidase A activity, so naturally I have high serotonin. But yeah, man, like to be honest, right now, if I ever wanted to, I haven't seen a situation when I've ever deliberately wanted to increase serotonin unless I can't think of a time now. Like I just haven't. Yeah.
I think dopamine tends to take a hit in modern society because a lot of people have, I think, stress and stimulants. One, for their deleterious effects on testosterone and the very strong link between testosterone and dopamine. I think you've done a lot of work for men, which is really good to see some strong advocates for male optimizing, because there's not enough conversation about testosterone at all right now. There's not. It's such a huge thing. Like a lot of in the US, there's a lot of people who are looking at the profound benefits of keeping testosterone optimal, even if that's through TRT. But you've really delved into that lately massively, and I think having that so dopamine takes a hit more often than anything. Serotonin you don't often talk about unless it's to do with an SSRI or an antidepressant, really. It usually seems okay by itself, but I was just curious to see if whilst we'd covered most of the nootropics in most of the other neurotransmitters, if serotonin was something you'd selectively sort of played with or had any application for when someone might use it.
I mean, I did use Kana extract, but I just, unfortunately, even I gave some to my brother and he was like just out of it as well. He wasn't.
Yeah, it's because I know Kana was getting a bit of one of those things where the supplement industry finds a new buzzword or a new supplement. They go, oh, wow, let's put in everything. Throw it in with a stimulant. People were like wondering why a huge stimulant load felt like nothing. And it just mutes everything. And it's a really weird one.
Kind of spacey on it. Hey, you feel like you're floating a little bit.
A bit doughy.
You kind of have this floating sensation. You're like, ooh.
Yeah,
Super Mario.
Yeah, it was a really unusual space, mate. I think, but look, being mindful of how long we've had you on, mate. I think we've had about an hour and a half just going deep on everything, which I am stoked on. And I think even possibly getting on for chapter 3 on the testosterone space in the future would be great because that's something that all three of us can.
Well, I've been waiting to ask. I've been waiting to get through this space to ask on that. So we'll have to do it as another episode because there's this live bacteria that I've been doing a little bit of reading about that supposedly can increase the size of your testes as well as production of semen and increase in testosterone levels. But we'll have to dig into that in another episode, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I mean that's that particular probiotic. It's part of my testosterone optimization course. It's like one of the key components of optimizing tests.
Like I've been talking to a few guys who have delved down this path and used it for the testicular atrophy that they've experienced after use of anabolics and seen profound effects with the physical size of the testes increasing. So
that's an interesting one with Pete because we got a lot of PED users who are listeners of ours. And before we wrap up, I think it's probably I shared a story this week of a bit of some friends of ours of the show who have a podcast who did a round table on PEDs, and we're in an industry where whether people know it or not, 80% of people you see on Insta that are in shape are probably running something. And I think looking at ways to help with that therapeutically afterwards, a lot of guys struggle with this, and I think they might misdiagnose low testosterone as just being stressed from work, or over time they're just noticing less and less motivation, less and less drive, less libido, less energy. They're recovering slower. They're starting to put on a spare tire. Their lower back is like love handles starting to blow out. They're just all around. We're just feeling crappy. We're gaining body fat. We're not carrying our muscle mass. You've been a big advocate for having optimized testosterone levels. So as a really fun note to finish on and to help and to segue into our next episode that we'll no doubt have you on for, I guess some quick hacks that you're happy to share. I know you've got a course on this side. We'll encourage everyone to enroll in your course, but some quick hacks then whilst we're in this really, sort of really, groundbreaking stuff you're doing. What are some unique areas you'd look at to help men optimize their testosterone levels?
I can't remember if in the first episode we spoke about icing.
We did. I've been doing it. I actually got onto this company called Snowballs.
Yes.
Have you used them? So you buy these Snowballs underwear. It's got a pouch at the front, and they come with ice packs that are this love heart shape. And you put the ice packs in the freezer, and they tuck into the pouch in the front of the underpants. It's amazing.
I did my own method. I went for a jog this morning. That was enough. It is like Arctic right now. So
I thought you were going to say you went for a jog with a bag of party ice pants, running around like a toddler with a full nappy.
Nature provided for me, mate. I didn't need the ice. Nature provided. But icing, for anyone who didn't listen to part 1, icing of the testicles is a really powerful way, apparently. That apparently called temperature of the external appendages down there really helps with optimizing. What was the pathway there? I can't remember how that worked.
Yeah. So the pathway is like the extreme vasoconstriction that you get from the ice, followed by like a rebound vasodilation, bringing new nutrients and blood flow to the testes. And anytime the testes are like 2 degrees too warm, it completely arrests spermatogenesis. So wow. I did a YouTube video. It's now like 20,000 views, and More Plates, More Dates spoken about it. Vigorous Steve spoke about it. Like if people want to learn more about that, check out my YouTube video. I got like a whole tutorial on that.
Yeah, beautiful. Look, so icing is really good. And being winter now, guys, there's a great opportunity. Nature is throwing every chance you need to try this out. Just walk outside and just expose the glory. You'll thank yourself for it. It's tough. So that's a good hack. And there is a great YouTube channel there with some amazing resources, guys. So for anyone who got value today, please do jump over to some other platforms there. because we've got so much to put out. And I think this part 3 will be a great space in the hormonal angle now that we've really hopefully brought a lot of value in the nootropic space today, mate. So thanks for an hour and a half of your time. I loved this conversation. This is what we're all about.
So did I. It was fun to be here.
And thanks so much, guys. I'm probably less in the geek out space as you two, but I always love listening in, obviously being able to have an understanding of this stuff and then reconnect it with your average Joe is kind of more my jam, but so much fun. Much fun talking about this stuff and really getting a deeper understanding of what's going on, on a cellular level and on a biochemical level. Amazing stuff. So thanks so much, Lucas. I really enjoyed this one.
Thanks, guys. Thanks.
Beautiful. Okay, guys. Thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in for another episode of the Wot Supp podcast. Until next time, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.